Jim Parker's law office was unusually crowded that day. That was because numerous relatives of the deceased wealthy landowner came in for the reading of his will. It was rumored that Francis Hughes was a quarrelsome and greedy man in his lifetime. However, when the rich man died of a heart attack, all of his relatives, both close and distant, suddenly decided to show up, hoping that the childless millionaire mentioned them in his will, which, judging by the rumors, he'd drawn up a long time ago. At that point, Jim Parker's office looked more like a buzzing beehive than an actual law firm. At first, the relatives tried to stay calm and talk in low voices, but when one of them accidentally raised his voice, the rest quickly followed suit. The lawyer cast a displeased glance at the crowd standing in front of him and coughed softly to get their attention. Everyone immediately got quiet and looked in the direction of Jim Parker. "Silence, please. Don't make me raise my voice," the man asked. The relatives of the deceased nodded their heads in response and got ready to listen. Deep down, every single one of them believed that the late rich man didn't forget about them and left each of them something of value. And only the wife of the deceased didn't hope to get anything special. Rachel Hughes knew her husband all too well to expect any kindness from him. It took the woman too long to realize that agreeing to marry Francis was the biggest mistake of her life. Rachel grew up in an orphanage and had no family apart from Francis. Nevertheless, she didn't marry him for the money, but for a completely different reason. Moreover, Rachel agreed to her husband's terms and signed a prenup, which stated that in the event of a divorce, she wouldn't get any of her husband's money. Francis knew what he was doing. It was his third marriage after all. Therefore, he didn't have any illusions when he got married to Rachel and behaved as his inner voice prompted him. The age difference between Francis and his wife was 15 years, which looked strange at best in the eyes of other people in their life. No one could believe that Rachel didn't marry her husband for the money and that her feelings were actually sincere. And now, standing in the lawyer's office, Rachel caught the sharp glances of her late husband's relatives, all of whom seemed to condemn her for something, but she didn't know what. Barbara Hughes, the late businesswoman's mother, seemed especially displeased. The old woman always despised her young daughter-in-law and never even tried to hide it. "Why would you want to marry this provincial orphan? Couldn't you find someone better to be your wife?" she said to her son. Francis only smiled in response and didn't say a single word. At the time she first met the millionaire, Rachel worked as a manager in a small company and couldn't be considered a catch. But Francis didn't care about all that in the least. The aging rich man wanted to have a young, beautiful woman by his side, someone to show off to his business partners, as well as to make him feel young again. Many thought that it was Francis's irregular working hours and the stress of doing business that caused his early demise. But the truth was that it was all the alcohol, which Francis consumed in unthinkable quantities. Of course, that wasn't something you could say out loud in public, and Rachel understood that all too well. The last thing the woman wanted was to stir up the past and remember the grievances her late husband caused her. Rachel was pulled out of her painful thoughts by the lawyer's voice when he started reading out Francis's will. The first person mentioned in the will was quite unexpectedly his mother, who got her son's huge mansion and all of his companies. Then came some distant relatives, most of whom Francis only ever saw back in his childhood. Since the millionaire had no children, everyone expected Rachel to get most of his financial assets. But when the lawyer announced that all the widow was getting was a house in a suburban village, everyone gasped. Truth be told, Rachel was just as shocked. She knew that Francis got that check shortly before his death from someone as a payment for a gambling debt. At best, it could serve as a shelter for some homeless people. At worst, a haven for rats and other rodents. Seeing her daughter-in-law's reaction, Barbara Hughes smirked smugly. "That's right, you filthy beggar. That's all you deserve. You wanted to get your hands on my son's money, but instead, you got some shack in the country," Francis's mother exclaimed. Rachel turned pale and left the lawyer's office amid snarky chuckles. She didn't want to look like a laughingstock in the eyes of those quarrelsome people, and therefore she decided to forget all about that family, as if it was all just a bad dream. Bitter tears were flowing down the woman's cheeks, but they didn't bring her any relief. Rachel wandered down the street, oblivious to the other people who deliberately tried to avoid her. Of course, Rachel didn't expect to get anything special from Francis, but her husband's will still shocked her. Is that really all I deserve after 10 years together? Some old ruins in a small town, God knows where? The woman thought bitterly. A week passed, during which Rachel calmed down a bit and pulled herself together. Rachel's first thought was to give up the inheritance that Francis left her, as if to make fun of her. But then she weighed all the pros and cons and decided to at least take a look at the house with her own eyes. To say that the building looked untidy would be a huge understatement. The ivy-covered walls, the burned-out tiles on the roof, and the chimney leaning to one side, it all made a very sad impression on the woman. The windows of the house were boarded up a long time ago, and then there was no doorbell or even a handle on the door. Having opened the door with the key she got from the lawyer, Rachel winced in displeasure. Darkness and desolation reigned inside the house. There were cobwebs everywhere, and the floor was covered with a thick layer of dust. Yep, cleaning it all would take at least a week, Rachel thought sadly. Moving from room to room, the woman went around the whole house, after which she froze in front of an inconspicuous door leading to the basement. I wonder what's down there, Rachel thought. The most interesting thing was that the woman couldn't really understand even why she decided to go to the basement. It was as if some invisible force pushed her to do this seemingly reckless decision. Having carefully pushed open the door, Rachel saw rickety wooden steps, which filled her with apprehension with their very appearance. The woman fumbled with her hand for a switch on the wall, and a beam of yellow light immediately lit up the narrow tunnel. Going down carefully, Rachel expected all kinds of things to happen, such as the collapse of the rotten steps or finding rats down there. But when the brave researcher finally got all the way down to the basement, all she was in for was bitter disappointment. There was nothing mysterious down there, just a dirty, empty room. Rachel sighed in disappointment and was about to turn back when she noticed a bed standing in the far corner of the basement. There was also a rickety chair and a small bedside table next to it. What the heck is this? Rachel thought. As she got closer, she noticed that there was a crumpled bedspread and a mattress on the bed. The woman grew even more suspicious. But when she pushed the bed aside, she saw something very strange. There was an inscription on the wall made in chalk. It read, "I am being held here illegally. Call my father." And then there was a number. Having read the inscription, Rachel thought about it. On the one hand, she wanted to call the number, but on the other hand, she was feeling very anxious about it, and sort of terrified too. The woman felt that the moment she called the number, something irreparable would happen. At the same time, Rachel was sure that Francis never went down to the basement and that he might have not even been to this house at all. Her late husband was too lazy to go exploring abandoned homes, even if he got them as payment for a debt. Having decided to protect herself in the event of something unforeseen happening, Rachel came up with the smart plan of action. The first thing she did was call the police and tell them about her strange find. Then Rachel contacted the captive's father, who turned out to be a successful businessman named Richard Johnson. 6 months ago, his 30-year-old son Liam didn't return home after his tennis practice. A large-scale search for the missing man was unsuccessful. All this time, the businessman was beside himself with worry for his son. And only thanks to Rachel's attentiveness did Richard Johnson get a lead that could help him find his son. Having learned the name of the former owner of the house, the police quickly found the kidnapper and the businessman's son. It turned out that Richard's ex-partner, who'd been feeling jealous of his more successful companion for a long time. One day, the two had a fight, which was so bad that the men even decided to break up their partnership. Pushed out of business, Alfred Brooks harbored a grudge against his ex-partner and decided to take out his anger on Richard's son, having lured him to the house of his late grandmother. There, Alfred tricked Liam into going down to the basement, which he then turned into a prison for the young man. Liam spent several months in that basement, and it was only after Alfred lost the house to Francis Hughes that Liam was moved to another location. During interrogation, Alfred quickly confessed and revealed Liam's current whereabouts. During the time he was held captive, the young man had lost 15 pounds and was very pale. The psychiatrists who examined Alfred came to the unanimous conclusion that he was mentally unstable and a danger to society. Now, the kidnapper was awaiting compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic. "Thank you, I'll never be able to pay you back for what you did," Richard Johnson said with tears in his eyes. Rachel smiled in response and immediately hurried to change the topic of the conversation. A week ago, the young widow hated that old house, but after it helped restore justice and free a nice young man, the woman looked at it with a completely different set of eyes. She didn't feel angry with Francis anymore. Of course, when he accepted the house as payment for a gambling debt, the businessman couldn't have known what terrible secrets it was keeping within its walls. About a week after his miraculous rescue, Liam came to see Rachel. Clutching a bouquet of dazzling white roses in his hands, the young man handed them to his savior. The young people started talking and felt a strong mutual sympathy for each other. To Rachel's surprise, Liam turned out to be a very smart and interesting young man. During the time that Liam was missing, his fiancée found herself another man, forgetting all about Liam. After listening to the young businessman's confused story, Rachel felt pity and sympathy for him. The next day, Liam came to see Rachel again, and to her sincere amazement, invited her to a dinner at a restaurant. According to the young people, it was that dinner that marked the beginning of their rapidly developing relationship, which gave them both hope for something bigger than just a regular friendship. 6 months later, Rachel and Liam held a magnificent wedding ceremony, which surprised even the most sophisticated residents of the city with its grandeur. Rachel decided not to abandon the house she got from her late husband, but renovated it instead. The house had literally transformed before her eyes, and it no longer reminded Liam of the months of confinement in its dark basement. At the end of our story, I'd like to say that whenever someone gets a gift, they shouldn't grumble at fate or think that it isn't good enough. Because one can never know what mysteries may be hiding under an inconspicuous wrapper. There might be something that would change their life forever.